Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining us today. We've got a great webinar all about information governance in the age of AI. There's lots of ways to spend your time, and we really appreciate you spending it with us. Today's speakers will include Seth Early, Dr. Thomas Bloomer, and myself, Dave Scribella, as moderator. Seth, you want to say hello?
Yeah, sure. Great to be here. We had overwhelming response from this webinar and 370 registrants, so that's fantastic. It's a great topic, and I think Thomas here is probably the hero here because of the great work that he does. So I'm sure that helped us gather a great audience. But we have some terrific content for you. I'm Seth Early, founder and CEO of Early Information Science. Been in this space for decades. I'll put it that way. Thomas, I'll let you do a quick intro yourself.
My name is Thomas Bloomer. I'm a knowledge management, depth, and AI evangelist, and I'm really excited being here with you, Seth and Dave.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. We want to thank our media partner at CMS Wire for helping to put together this webinar. Check them out at CMS Wire, and they've got lots of publications and events themselves. We are recording today. The recording will be available after the webinar, so please, if you have not had a chance to join or want to get a copy of the recording, be on the lookout for a recording webinar, and the slides will be available as well. We plan to go about 50 minutes and want to leave some time for Q&A at the end. And finally, we will be doing 2 polls, and we'd love to get your feedback.
4, sorry. I
4 polls, okay.
We have time, yeah.
Before we get started here, our next webinar for the EIS team is planned on April 24th, same exact time. I believe that's the Wednesday as well. The topic will be advancing AI in the enterprise, really focused on knowledge and prompt engineering, and what are some of the approaches and skills required to really think about how to interact and retrieve information and get the right set of skills and approaches to interact with your knowledge to stay competitive with the most modern technologies around large language models and helping to generate AI.
I had a little bit of a breakthrough on this in terms of thinking about prompts as metadata. And of course, we have metadata on content and knowledge. So pulling those 2 things together is going to be really, really exciting and very, very powerful.
If you don't know anything about Early Information Science, we are a strategic consulting firm. We focus on organizing information and data. We like to take on the most significant and sticky information problems out there. We've been at it for about 30 years now, a team of specialists in data science, information and library science. And we're focused really across different industries with the intent to help commerce grow, help customer experience and customer service operations, and also unlock innovation potential. And you can see some of the companies we've worked with down below. Our agenda today, we've got a poll to start off things. We want to walk through the scenarios that will really frame the conversation, some questions to consider as you're thinking about AI governance. Want to talk about when AI projects do not meet expectations. A lot of that has to do with effective governance and some things we think you can put in place quickly. Walk through our framework of policies, guidelines, and decision-making, some of which is very familiar and some of which is very new when we're talking about AI projects and how to govern an AI program. Digital adoption platforms, I'm really excited about that and sort of its relationship with AI. You can see how metrics play a role and how to think about measuring your governance program for AI. And finally, some of the critical steps around knowledge operations, how to think about, tag, and manage your knowledge differently in the age of AI.
I'll just put a quick plug in here. If you haven't had a chance to take this survey, the URL is up there. Can you also put that in the chat for folks, Carolyn? And the objective survey is really something that we're gathering more information about. It's been up for a month or so. If you've already taken it, just please be patient for the results. And we will give you a copy of my book if you'd like as a reward for the survey. And of course, we'll share benchmarking. We'll share what other companies are doing. So take a look at that if you have a chance. I also wanted to mention that we were sending out the physical reprint of this particular document. This is a peer-reviewed journal article in Journal of Applied Marketing Analytics, and it was about retrieval augmented generation. We're not going to talk a lot about that in depth today, but if you need clarity on that, Carolyn, you can also put that in the chat for people. But that you can now download. But I was sending out physical reprints, and I was expecting people to do things like this. And someone just sent me an image. They sent me a photograph of how they marked it up. So that's kind of what I was looking for, and that's what I got. So you can also get a physical reprint if you would like. Something different about having it physically.
So let's walk through some scenarios that will guide the conversation today. Start with the first one here. AI pilots proliferate rapidly. Right. So what does this mean? The clock speed of AI projects and how we're thinking about looking at monitoring and making decisions to change our models, to tune certain aspects. It's much faster than how governance programs in the past have operated. So there's a natural tension in play there, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. AI tools and data have scaling, process management, and transparency challenges. So we'll think about, what are the right tool sets and capabilities. Digital adoption platforms help to operationalize what we're trying to do and how to keep up with some of those challenges. AI projects often lack alignment with business performance objectives. So we're seeing and hearing a lot out in the market around, well, we've tried some stuff, but we actually didn't really tie it to specific use cases or business priorities. So it's time to take a step back, think about what are the business objectives you're actually trying to achieve, and how to apply AI and use cases to that, and how to measure that. And we'll walk through some of our thinking there. And finally, Gen AI projects lack context and produce erroneous results. Well, we're seeing that, and that's because in a lot of cases, companies don't really have the right knowledge, operations, or the processes to manage and think about how to apply the best content and knowledge to a specific AI project. And we'll walk through what some of the knowledge operations that you need to have, what that looks like, and what we think will be a setup for success. So scenario one, we want to talk about AI pilots and projects moving at a much quicker speed. But before we do that, we want to know a little bit from our audience. Where are you in your AI governance journey? So you can see some of the specific choices here. We are in the planning stages and haven't really launched a governance program for AI. We are in the implementation stage. We've implemented AI governance, but have some challenges. We have AI governance fully deployed, no major issues, so you're off and running, and maybe we can learn from you. Or I don't even know what AI governance is. That's why I'm here today.
So someone had put a question up asking if we're recording. Yes, we are recording. Will you get a link? Yes, you will get a link, and you will also get the slides. And I saw, Carolyn, that you put in the link for the AMA document. Make sure you put in the link for the survey as well, and you can request a copy of the book with that survey. But looks like some interesting results are coming in. Most people are in the planning stages, and I meant to say for AI governance, right? We're in a governance implementation phase, have some challenges. Unsurprisingly, no one has said that they've deployed it with no major issues. And of course, a lot of folks are here for the information and the knowledge to say what is AI governance. So thank you for that. Let me share those results really quickly so you guys can take a look at that. And again, it's an interesting distribution with the vast majority, in the planning stages, which is good, which is not atypical in today's world. So when you start thinking about AI, we have to ask certain questions. One of the things is that too many organizations are saying, we need AI, we need AI, we need to do Gen AI, we need to tell our stockholders, our stakeholders, our employees, our investors, everybody that we're doing something with AI or that generative AI is on our agenda. And the question is really, you can't generically deploy this, even retrieval augmented generation, you can't, which is very specifically using a particular data source for the large language model, the ChatGPT application to pull information from. You can't even do that generically. You have to say, what specific problem are we trying to solve? And then you need to build the use cases around that. But again, going in and saying this generically, we need AI, or we're going to do AI, is not going to work. And too many organizations have tried to check that box. We have to measure the impact. We have to say, for this particular problem that we're solving, what is the quantifiable impact? How can we measure it? Now, I get that there's lots of experiments that have gone on, that companies are trying to figure this out. So you're going to have a lot of throwaway stuff. But I think executives have been burned or overpromised, underdelivered, or they just don't have the patience for more POCs. We talk about POVs versus POCs. POV is proof of value, POC is proof of concept, proof of value says you can actually deploy this. But we need to make sure we understand what we're measuring, what we're instrumented for. We have to ask, well, how will you operate? What's going to be different? This is the so what of any of these applications. How will you act on information that is either now available, available more quickly, is more enriched, is more readily consumable, and so on? How are we going to act on that, right? What is going to be impacted? Where's the data come from, right? We need to understand where that data is and whether it's of sufficient quality. There's some other things that we need to know. I mentioned the proof of concept versus proof of value. A lot of times when proof of concepts are deployed in sandboxes, they have different set of situations and different circumstances, different hyperparameters, different data sources than when they're actually deployed in the real world. And the question is always, well, what's it going to take to go there? So that's why we tend to build proof of value projects, which are built with an intent to deploy, an intent to scale. Because again, otherwise you're just going to have something that's going to be a POC, and so what? We have a POC. One of the things we have to do is we have to address data issues upstream. We can't do them after the fact. There's a cost factor of about 10. And Thomas, you were so kind to send me that research, and I didn't get a chance to review it, but we can send that out in our follow-up. But this is quantified, right? This is, if you address the data problems at the source, it's going to be a fraction of the cost is doing it downstream. Who's going to own this, right? Because when you think about IT experimenting, they have to have the business and partnership. But as time goes on, when it gets handed off completely to the business, well, who is going to own the solution, and who is going to fund it, and how will it be funded, and how is it going to fit in with the overarching ecosystem of the organization, the information organization? And here's a critical one. Has the organization been correctly informed about the capabilities? Because there's a lot of motherhood and apple pie out there. There's a lot of promises. There's a lot of over-promising. There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of nonsense. And this is something we did for a group of 16 bank CEOs, and we're going to be doing this at an upcoming conference on compliance. But the point is, what is possible, what is practical, and what do you need to do? Right? It's setting the expectations and managing the expectations of your stakeholders, of your employees, of your leadership, and telling them what it's going to do and what it's not going to do. That's really important. Saying what is not in scope or it's not going to be capable of is as important as saying what it will do. But we have to have those expectations set. Now, one of the things I wanted to show with this illustration is the fact that there are lots of places to intervene. There's lots of places where you can have an impact on processes. And later on, we're going to talk about metrics, but look at every aspect of the customer journey or the employee journey, right? You can build a similar journey map and life cycle map for employees when they're being onboarded, when they're being enabled, et cetera, and when they are going through doing their jobs day to day. So we need to make sure that we are correctly managing the implementations and the executions and the interventions in every area that AI can impact the business, and it can impact the business across the board. So just thinking about the complexity. So one of the things we want to think about is, well, when do they not meet expectations? Well, first of all, misalignment with the business. When you have those incorrect expectations, when you have, I used to say managing by magazine article. Nobody has magazine articles anymore, but it's managing by articles that you find online or webinars or vendor presentations. But there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of unrealistic expectations, broad scope, and poorly defined outcomes. That was what I was saying before. You can't just say, I'm going to check this box and have AI. We need to really define that. We cannot have an overly broad scope. And many times I like to say, you can't automate a mess, but actually you can automate a mess. But you can't automate what you don't understand. Even if it's a mess, you have to understand it, right? So that, many times the processes are not well defined, and people end up trying to do things where they don't have a clear understanding of the entire process. Data management is huge. When people talk about lack of training data, when it used to be, why isn't the AI ready? Well, we're still training it. We need more training data. We need to do more training. What is training, right? Training is data and content and information. And in our argument is that it's curated, right? We still have to curate this information because it doesn't happen automatically. And that article that I showed you, by the way, my book was written 3 years ago. Hold up the right number of figures. The book was written 3 years ago, but actually 4 years ago now. So I did have the right number of figures in 2020, and everything is still applicable today. We didn't talk about large language models. That's why that article from the Journal of Applied Marketing Analytics is so valuable. It's a good complement to that. But everything that we talked about then is still valid. The whole idea of building ontologies and knowledge graphs and having those organizing principles, having a reference architecture, all super important stuff. And so when we don't have those sources, we don't have those knowledge sources that are curated, or we don't have consistent organizing principles across our different systems, it's going to be very difficult to leverage AI. And we have to think about structuring our knowledge for differentiation. We have standardization will give us efficiency. Differentiation will give us competitive advantage. If everybody is using the same knowledge that comes out of the ChatGPT or a large language model to try to compete or try to solve problems, well, you're doing what everybody else is doing. You'll get some efficiency, but you won't get differentiation. What do you differentiate on? Your enterprise knowledge, your organizational knowledge, your expertise, your knowledge of customers and markets and competitors and solutions. The other things that get in the way of AI projects is the lack of socialization. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? That Peter Drucker was famous for saying that. And the change doesn't happen by itself. That's what we're going to talk about, the digital adoption platforms. But people will not trust things that they don't understand. So we need to make sure there's transparency and there's clarity about what the inputs are and what the outputs are. And the other thing that we're going to keep coming back to is, what does success look like? How do we measure it? And if we don't have those success metrics and we don't have those measures, we are not going to be able to say when it's valuable, when it's working. These are all governance. These are all governance initiatives and issues. Now, you could say some of this also applies no matter what you're doing, but it's important to keep in mind that the basics of governance are still important. So what does it do? It manages conflicts. There could be different priorities. So you might say, I want to increase customer satisfaction, but I want to decrease average call handling time. They may be in opposition to one another, or across business units or across drivers. We need to make sure we're getting input on an ongoing basis from different stakeholders and different groups so that we can evolve our capabilities. We need to prioritize the resource allocation and the attention of the organization. We need to make sure we have the right accountability, the right roles and responsibilities, building RACI charts, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. We need to think about the maturity of the organization. One size does not fit all here. And so when we are building governance, we need to say, well, where are you in your life cycle and your maturity? And we don't want to build something that's too onerous that people are not going to be able to handle. We also might make sure, as I said, that the investments are getting the result. And that's another critical element. That comes back to that. I'm going to talk about that whole life cycle of customers and talk about data connecting to process, connecting to outcome, connecting to strategy. So all of those things are important. And we have to have centralized standards with decentralized decision-making. This is federal standards versus states' rights, right? Or federal control versus states' rights. This is saying we need to have certain things. We need to use the same ontologies or be intentional about the differences. We need to use similar structures. We need to use similar platforms or the same platforms, whatever it is. But it's saying we can't have 1,000 flowers bloom and have just complete chaos. We need to make sure there are centralized standards and rules, but then we need to make sure that the decision making and the application of those rules are decentralized and in the business unit and close to the customer. And of course, we want to make sure that we have incentive to use the systems that are aligned with our business goals. Again, if people are saying we want to capture our knowledge in call centers, but everybody is saying time per incident, your clock stops when you complete that call, well, they're not going to necessarily capture their knowledge because it's going to impact their metric. And of course, we have to make sure that socialization is taking place on an ongoing basis, and we need to make sure that that adoption is happening. I know I'm going at a rapid pace here, so that's why you have the recording. You can always slow it down and listen again, but I want to make sure I keep you guys engaged here. But let's talk about AI governance. And when you think about governance, policies, guidelines, and decision-making framework that address the AI program alignment and effectiveness while managing and mitigating risks to the organization. So let's talk about these specifically with AI, because that's a good general overview of what governance is, right? It's policies and guidelines. What are policies? Policies are statements of rules. This has to be done this way, and actions. What data can be used for your machine learning and AI applications? There's a policy around that. We can use this data. We cannot use this data. How is that data curated and managed, right? There's got to be a specific policy, specific process, rules for how that data is vetted and curated and managed. What's its provenance? We need to understand the source. We need to understand what rights we have, the usage, the auditability, right? Those are all things that are part of policies, rules, formal rules. Is it biased? Can it be trusted? How has it been validated? And is it confidential? Is it personally identifiable information? What's the impact to upstream and downstream systems? We build policies around that so that we have rules to keep those guardrails up. Now, when you start thinking about guidelines, what are guidelines? And here's where guidelines and policies are kind of, when you think about a guideline is a recommendation for an action, but it is not a hard and fast rule. But a guideline can lead to a policy. So policies are the rules. Guidelines are the recommendations that help us act in a certain way. Collect data ethically and transparently. Well, there may be rules around that, but the guideline is that's what you're going to do. And everybody needs to nod their head and say, yes. Data quality should be enhanced at every touch point. Again, that can spawn or catalyze a rule or a formal policy, but it's a good guideline. Many times you're starting with guidelines to form the framework of a program, and then you have to build out the details behind that. So guidelines are going to be more ambiguous and higher level, less concrete by their nature. Engage business stakeholders and data initiatives. What's in it for them? Monitor performance, make sure you intervene to improve your outcomes, train employees in how to protect IP. And Dave, we had an interesting conversation about this. Should I go to the next one or should we stop here? Because you had some really interesting observations.
Well, I think it's really about how guidelines and how telling your employees to collect data ethically and transparently, sounds right. But then how do you actually, over time, effectively work with them to measure it and make sure that there are practices in place that meet the spirit of that guideline? And you don't necessarily want to make it too methodical and over-engineer it, but you want to make sure that there's some training. And I think, you can consider center of excellence programs, in the past are very familiar to people. What does that look like when we're actually asking for transparent use of data? I think for most companies, they want to make sure that their customers and their partners understand how data about them is being used. So what does that mean for marketing teams? What does that mean for sales teams? It's really going through training and just helping them to understand how to more effectively communicate the practices and guidelines that they're conducting.
And Thomas, do you want to add to that? Because again, this comes back to digital adoption and ensuring that there's compliance with policies and guidelines.
Well, when it comes to DApp, we try to put some of these guardrails right in the application where things happening, and I will show that in a second. Where like you don't even leave people an option. You just kind of forced softly into the right things to do, and all the things you mentioned are definitely totally valid. Everything has to be ethical and with a business outcome in mind.
Mhm. Yeah. Yes, and I don't want to steal your thunder because that's coming up. I want to just get through decision-making framework. But what is a decision-making framework? It's the when and how to act. So many times it's driven by a variation in a metric. Maybe a metric is out of alignment. Maybe you're not getting enough conversions, or people are dropping off, or you're getting bad CSAT scores, or people are marking it. Whatever it is, it can be driven by baseline metrics. We also can have, and there are rules that say based, do an action based on this trigger. And the trigger can come from the business, right? It can come from a business need, a business requirement, a customer need. It could come from a change in technology. It could come from a change in system, adding new products to your catalog. It could be from new topics and organizing principles for your content, right? So all of these things are triggers that need to be acted upon, and we want to have the rules for those triggers. And again, this is stuff that takes time to develop, but it becomes a framework that you can use throughout the organization, where you're trying to make sure that you have the ability to make metrics-driven decision making, data-driven decision making. With that, we're going to talk a little bit about this process of scaling and management, process management, transparency, because again, they have problems and challenges without tools like adoption
platforms.
Platforms. Yes, digital adoption platforms. I'm sorry, I had a little brain, maybe a little aneurysm. I don't know what happened there. Anyway, it is actually a newer term to me, so I'm going to cut myself some slack because it's a fairly new term. So we want to ask you first, how familiar are you with digital adoption platforms? I should have just gone to my next slide and I would have known what DApp was. Is it something that you're not familiar with at all? Maybe you have heard of them, but they're not on the radar. Maybe it's something you're actively investigating. I see a lot of people are saying that they have not heard of them. So this is great. So you're going to learn some really neat stuff that's going to be applied. Some people are doing them. They have some pilots, but maybe not for AI. Or some, here we go, a couple of folks have done it for AI. Well, this is really great feedback, guys, because we think that this is very, very important. And there's a couple of vendors that we work with, and we have the ability to help you with this. I was hoping Thomas would join us and run our DApp program and practice, but he ended up taking a job elsewhere for now. But we'll keep him in mind for the future, right? We never know where anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love working with you, Thomas. But he'll be an advisor for us in this area. So looks like most people, 70% have not heard of this at all. And then another 22% have heard of them. I'm sorry, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So now you guys should be able to see the vast majority of you guys are not really familiar with this. So this is going to be really valuable. I'm glad you're going to learn something. But it does look like some people have actually done some initiatives. Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to now turn it over to Thomas.
Perfect. Thank you, Seth. And DApp stands for Digital Adoption Platform, and it's an overlay of any application. So if you have SAP or a Salesforce, it's just a transparent overlay. And then you can do whatever you want with this application without having the need of code. They can have different triggers on top of your application doing different things. And we will talk a little bit what you can do. But so that's the kind of what a digital adoption platform can do. And it's actually very interesting that about 70% of people never heard of that, because Gartner did a study a couple of years ago, and said by 2025, 70% of companies will have DApp implemented. We are a year away and 70% don't even know about it. And I think the combination with AI is so powerful and will actually change that. So how can DApp guardrail AI? So there are three areas. It's AI visibility, policy enforcement, and embedded AI. So visibility, DApp can list all the different application users and the usage of any application within your system and show which AI tools you already use and see like, hey, you may have a problem here. Since we talk about policies, DApp can intercept AIs, display AI policies, and it can actually link to the approved AIs you want to actually show in your company. So you can have a pop-up which says, hey, you're not allowed to use ChatGPT. Here's our policy. Click here to see our internal AI. And you have a button you have to press, and it's recorded that you say, hey, I understand. It can go a step further to actually block it all together that you can't even type in. So these are certain things you can do. But on a more positive side, you can embed AI in your application to enhance efficiency. And it's not kind of just being the bad guy blocking stuff, but really make it very easy right in your application to link to the right tool. So these are kind of the three high level where DApp can help with an AI application. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So what are some of the benefits from a DApp implementation? First, it helps secure and clean data, as Seth mentioned. If you have bad data, you don't want to put an AI on top of it. You just have more problems. So it helps with data validation as data gets created. It also helps generating new data because every keystroke, every mouse click is recorded. And this is just a tremendous source of value and data analytics, which is really kind of tied into a DApp application, is super powerful. And we will talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But one of the things which is really powerful, it gets improved UX experience, like you can get personalization to the next level. You can have personalized prompts based on mouse movements. If you feel like this person doesn't know what they do on their screen, or if there's a certain time delay, you can intercept and it's like, hey, do you need help? And how can we help? So this is just the surface, but I hope you see like all the different things you can do. So switching a little bit to AI, if you can go to the next slide. So we want to measure that, so we want to go from tools to business impact, as Seth mentioned, from tactical to strategic, and from retroactive to proactive to really help. So how does that look with the tools that we are talking of? So we have on the one side the measurements and then the business impact. So we can measure the module adoption and then make decision if you want to increase or sunset it. User onboarding, productivity increase. We have error reduction. Well, that leads to lower support costs. Product utilization, identifying training opportunities within your company. End-to-end process is really, really important. Address wait time in between processes. AI intervention, which we just saw, reduce risk exposure, and AI crosslinks helps with efficiency gains. What we often do is optimizing process and start squeezing minutes out of a process, and then it goes to the next department, and sometimes there are days in between. Nobody manages it. And now we can tie these things together with DApp and start managing end-to-end processes. And I think this is a game changer. Okay. So what is really important while doing all these things is being aware of data fallacies and biases. People have heard about bias, and we will talk about that in the next slide in AI. And it's really something you have to be aware of, And data fallacies, like many people take the data, make some really good analysis, and then come to the wrong conclusions. And it just totally blows your credibility to upper management or your stakeholders. So that's why I just listed some of the ones which just often come up. And if you want to know more about them, just let me or Seth know, and we can give you more information about that. But that's something which is always very important to keep in mind. So let's talk about the challenge of AI bias. So if you can go to the next slide. So here is a representation of how many females are working in which ever job. And there was a very interesting study done with Mindjourney, which is a text-to-image AI generator. And they simply ask, like, can you show me a librarian? And then they start tracking how many times AI showed a man versus a female. And you see 3 are actually above the line, where we saw more females than men, which is most likely a stereotype by itself. But you see most of the images were actually generated as men. And we know there are a lot of female doctors, but doctors were primarily man, man, man. Now, you may not be interested in generating images, but I think the beauty of this study is it's just so transparent to show the bias. Now, think about you have an LLM and start working with text. It's so much harder to identify that, but it's baked in because whatever the system was trained is what it gives you back. So just keep that in mind. I love this story because it's so black and white.
Absolutely.
Talking about studies, the Boston Consulting Group worked with Harvard Business Review to really look at the power of AI. And if you can go to the next slide, Seth. These are the 4 big things they found. I think you have to click one more. The value creation is quite big. 90% of participants felt there is an improved benefit of using AI, and actually bottom performers improved their performance by about 43%, and even top performer could get 17% out. And actually the gap, the performance gap almost vanished. And this is what we often hear in the news. It's like, wow, that's really fantastic, and AI will take over our jobs and all that stuff, which I don't think it will happen. But what we don't hear is actually there's also value destruction. And if you use AI for the wrong tool, for something it wasn't trained, it can actually destroy value. And in this study, they found that 26% of bottom performers actually did worse than people who did not use AI. It's like, wow. And even top performers saw a 17% decrease in their performance by using AI for the wrong purpose. So they were thinking like, well, could we do something about that? Let's do training. So they had a training about 30 minutes talking about bias and hallucination and all the great things which comes with AI. And they hoped it will get better. Now, if you look at the third chart here, you see actually people who went through the training did worse than people without training. And people really ask, like, wait a second, what's happening here, Thomas? That doesn't make sense. So what they figured out is people who got through training, they felt so confident in the ability of AI and themselves that they start using AI just for everything indiscriminately. And that's why they perform worse. So this is something really important for you to keep in mind if you start planning rolling out AI, that you make sure you use it for the right purpose. That's why DAP can really help you making sure it goes to the right place or stop you from going to the place you shouldn't go. And the last thing I think is also important is creativity. As an individual, you go to ChatGPT and wow, I get all this information which I didn't know, which is great. But 70% of people felt that in the long term, the creativity will be stifled. And 41% felt that group diversity actually is lower. And if you think about, if you have a diverse team with people from Africa, Asia, Europe, United States, men and females together, you can mix certain things up which an AI may not come, because you always pluck the things out of the same pool, especially if you're on the cutting edge of stuff, that may be a problem. So we can send you information about that if you're interested. I found that a very good study.
Yeah, no, I meant to put that in the slide, and we'll send that afterwards for folks as additional resources. We did have a couple of questions that I wanted to pause for a moment and answer. One of them was about, Dave, do you want to talk about this? Let's see. It says this one was answered. There's a couple that were answered. And but Dave, you wanted to talk, did you want to talk a little bit about engaging stakeholders in data initiatives?
Sure. Do we have examples? I think it's generally around making sure that your stakeholders can see If they're not actively engaged in an AI project, there's a path forward, and getting them familiar with some of the projects going on is helpful, right? That keeps them informed. But ultimately, it's about their use cases. I think, what we try to do and what we try to um, certainly advocate and emphasize is to get really, all functional areas of a big company, sales, marketing, customer service, manufacturing. There are use cases that can absolutely be improved, enhanced, even brand new use cases created by or through AI. And I think it's important for them to start to understand, okay, these are use cases that we own. These are things we're doing today. And this is how AI can help in the future. The other thing I'd say is sometimes when it's around a data initiative that might be a little bit more foundational, right? So it's data quality. And maybe some people don't see exactly their role. You have a business data steward or stakeholder. You want them to have a stake in improving that data quality. And you can gamify that, right? You can sort of compare them to other people on their team or other groups. If it's sort of a regional setup, maybe other departments. And you want to make sure that they can understand by increasing and improving data quality, whether it's a model, whether it's just kind of basic profile information on customers or partners, they are improving other business outcomes and areas of their business, which ultimately line up to kind of that top level set of corporate. It's going to increase revenue. It's going to improve customer experience, et cetera. So I think that's the way that you engage them and keep them engaged.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to the whole what's in it for them, right? And can we tie a metric? We're going to show you this in just a moment. This actually dovetails nicely into the next section. But it's saying, how do we align, say, data quality with a process? And the person who's responsible for that process would care about the data quality if we can show there's a causation or correlation between the quality of their data and the business outcome. And the same thing, again, process leads to a business outcome. So we can measure a process, we can see how that's going, and then we can look at a business outcome. And people are responsible for those areas. So they're going to be more, they're going to be more, they're going to care more. They're going to be more engaged about that when it impacts their bonuses. But Thomas, we had a question. Karen Schneider had asked a question about how does DAP improve data, right? Let me just take a quick look, make sure I get this. If a DAP layer is a layer on applications, how does it help clean data?
Okay, really good question. It all depends where you set your priorities. So one of the easy way is DAP can do data validation upon pressing the submit button. So if you don't have already data validation inside your application, you can actually put an invisible layer on top of your button, the submit button, and rather than submit it right away, it first goes through a DAP algorithm and check like, well, is this formatted correctly? What about this? What about this? And you can check it. If it's good, it will submit it. Otherwise, it will prompt you to kind of like, hey, we would like to have that format differently. You can also format on the fly differently, like you can actually intercept as it gets entered. So there are different levels you can intercept and help that the data gets clean before it gets actually saved into the system.
And let us know if that didn't sufficiently answer your question, but hopefully it does. So it's, when you think about, say, Salesforce, when people say things like, oh, our Salesforce data quality is terrible. Well, because salespeople aren't putting the information in, right? You can't ask IT to solve that. You have to solve that at the data input level when someone's creating new contact and they have to fill out the right fields in the form. So that's where you start to have that user intervention when it's upstream far enough. If it's downstream, then it's going to be a little more difficult. But if people are touching it and they have the ability to improve it, then that's when you can enforce those types of policies. Let's see. Yeah, it's great for the stakeholder. Oh, good. I'm glad that helped. Great for stakeholder alignment. Here's one other one I'm going to ask or answer quickly, how do you create governance when the field or industry is changing swiftly? This is where agile governance has to come in. Dave, Thomas, do you want to take that? And I can add some color.
Yeah, I can go quickly. The nice thing with DAP is you can actually, as I show in my little example, bring it right in where it's critical. You know, it's not like, hey, read this policy and mention that you have read it. It is baked in your framework what you're doing. You know, it's like if you have changed something, like, or if let's say approval levels went from 10,000 to 20,000, you can just put it in there, and you can even comment and point to your policy in case someone doesn't understand what happened, especially if it gets lowered. This is normally the bigger problem. So I think there's a lot of flexibility where you don't have to run behind people, because you just bring it right where it's actually critical.
And I would say, thank you for that. And I would say that governance is going to be even more important in a fast-changing industry, because you have to make decisions. And even if you have a framework of guidelines to make those decisions, that's going to be better than not having that framework or guidelines to make the decisions. So it's really important when the field is changing quickly, because you have to adapt that much more quickly. You can't have something super cumbersome, but you can certainly put into place some frameworks. Dave, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, but I think we're running a little bit short on time. So
All right, let's keep going then. I'm going to ask this question. So the next hypothesis was AI projects have often lack alignment with the business performance objective, missing the risk versus reward. So I want to ask, how are you measuring AI projects? So if you put this one up, many times people are not instrumented to do that. They're measuring internal efficiencies, say a call center. They could be measuring external experiences such as CSAT, customer satisfaction, the revenue impact. And if you have an other, please let us know in the chat. I'm going to give that a moment or two to percolate. Yes, we do have that BCG link. Thomas, do you have that handy? Can you drop that into
all right. So actually, one of our attendees put it in. We're all good.
One of the attendees put it in. Oh, thank you, attendee. That's great. Yeah, I forgot to put that in. So again, the vast majority are not instrumented to measure results. So let me go ahead and share this now, since the popcorn has stopped popping. Whoops. Failed to says, well, okay, there we go. It said another poll had started, but we didn't want another poll yet. So let's try sharing the results. Okay, there we go. Great. I had an error message. So we're not measuring, not instrumented. That's a big, proportion of people. People are measuring internally. Fine. Call center is popular. Externally, customer satisfaction, impact on revenue. Great. So it's important to understand where you can measure and where you can be instrumented. So let's keep going. Let's see. We had someone raise their hand. Can people talk? I can allow you to talk. Go ahead. Let's allow you to talk. Carrie, I think I gave you permission. Did you raise your hand? Did you want to unmute and ask a question? Oh, hand is down. Okay. Jennifer, did you want to ask a question? Okay. Hand is down. All right. Sorry, guys. If your hand is up, I'm just curious. You can also put something in the chat of the Q&A. But when you start looking at AI governance, it has to be meaningful. It has to be meaningful because it has to focus on rewards and risks, right? So we need to have the right level of accountability. As I mentioned before, business and IT need to partner. You can't expect business to fix all their data, but you can't expect IT to get the salespeople to enter data, right? So we have to have this proactive culture of people stewarding the data and the content. Of course, that has to be defined with our roles and responsibilities. And we need to also make sure that we're monitoring at the business unit level. So we have to have the framework that makes sure that we are making the right investments and that we're measuring the results in each of these areas. And of course, making sure that the process monitoring, the AI KPIs, the metrics insights are are operationalized so that we can see this across the organization. And let's see, whoops, sorry, that was going backwards. And here I wanted to just kind of talk about the process for doing this. And the idea is that we are going to have a hypothesis about an outcome, right? We're going to put that into place by saying, what is it about the user behavior? What is it about the outcome? What causes them to be successful? And then we need to continually measure that and look at where we are versus a target. And if we are off the target, we need to be able to improve that and curate our experience, curate our content or our taxonomy, and then we need to be able to test and evaluate that and publish, update, shampoo, rinse, repeat, right? So it's a continual cycle of managing and monitoring, because what we want to do is make sure that we are aligned with business outcomes. And for for behavioral outcomes, again, it could be search analytics, it could be business analytics, it could be content analytics, and so on. So the whole idea here is to continually measure these things and to have a cycle of making changes, measuring the value of those changes, making updates, and then doing it again, right? Otherwise, we're not going to know if we're successful. So we have lots of different measures, and I'm just going to give you this. This is, we call it our layer cake. People will say, how's this going to improve revenue? And you're down in the weeds, right? You're saying, well, how do I know my AI tool is working, my training data is working, search is working, taxonomy, whatever it might be. But we can have data scorecards, and the data, and many people have seen this, but I'll review it again. Data supports a process. And this is where we have our process scorecards: time per incident, first call resolution, abandonment, and so on. Then the process supports a business unit objective. And this is a bigger picture. This is where I like to say executives either get bonused, or, as my colleague Chris Penn likes to say, you catalyze a resume generating event. And again, the objectives do align with whatever that strategy is. And we need to have that linkage up and down the food chain. We can also look at this from an e-commerce. That was a customer experience. We can look at it from an e-commerce perspective. And again, same thing. We're asking, how do we know our tools are working? How do we know our data quality is working? And so what we want to do is have the fill rates, have the heuristics, have the content quality, the knowledge quality, the alignment, and then saying, well, what processes are we trying to improve? Site traffic, leads, conversions, whatever it is. And then what are the business objectives that those processes support? And, again, connect that to the enterprise, and then have that linkage up and down that food chain. And here's where we saw this before. We can do this across the entire customer lifecycle, right? There's our data and technology scorecards. There's our sport process scorecards, and there are outcome scorecards. So we can actually be data-driven and decision-making that cuts across the entire organization. Now, this is not easy to get to, but we have all these places we can intervene, and we have all these places where we have processes, we have accountabilities, we have, data, we have technology, and we can score all of those things. So when you start thinking about connecting to business outcomes, there's lots of different metrics, right? Employee metrics, customer journey metrics, and you can start looking at things like engagement, conversion, getting the right answer, the amount of time people are spending looking for information, right? We had one customer that reduced that time for field service by 50%, ended up saving them tens of millions of dollars per year. But when we look across the journey, we need to map that journey, and then we need to say, what can we measure across the journey, and then where can we have our interventions? Now, the last scenario here is really about knowledge. We didn't talk about retrieval augmented generation, but RAG is depends on having the right knowledge. And if we don't have the right results and we don't have the right context, it's likely due to immature knowledge processes. One last poll, guys. We only have a few minutes left, so let's quickly get this up. And are you embarking on knowledge initiatives? No plans in alignment with your Gen AI. No plans, early stages, but no resources, planning stages with resources, in flight with challenges, in flight with no challenges. And the last one is, you're in knowledge for nirvana, right? You have mature knowledge operations. That's great. We see it, one person there. We're not seeing bell curves, interestingly enough. Maybe my questions aren't right, but it does, well, getting a little bit of a bell curve here, I guess. Early stages, no, so I think when people are not planning on this, they have to understand. That's why that article, get a copy of that, get a physical copy so you can leave it on someone's desk so that they understand the role of knowledge in generative AI. That's super, super important. Looks like one or two more. Let me go ahead and end the poll because we're tight on time, and let me go ahead and share the results so you can see 26 out of 70 people who responded are in the early stage, but no budget. And then some have no. So a significant number are, not necessarily going down this path, but it's very important. Those in the planning stages, great. You have budget, you have allocation. Again, it's not without problems. So this is a very challenging area. Okay, let's wrap it up here. So when we're trying to operationalize this, a knowledge operations is very important. Again, it's to designate policies, guidelines, and procedures. And so how do we do this design? We need to have those clear metrics. We need to have objectives with the measurable outcomes. We need to have the use cases that support that. Again, very, very important. Have specific use cases. We need the knowledge lifecycle manager to support the use cases, right? So capture, componentization, integration. We need data and terminology. We need to know how aligned our terminology is across the organization. These are taxonomies, metadata, knowledge graphs, ontologies. We need to know what knowledge sources we have. We have to inventory them, but we also have to audit them, see how good they are. And we need an information architecture framework. And that's all of the different elements of that. When we want to stand up governance, we have certain things. We talked about principles. This is kind of like, these are kind of the guidelines. I should have used guidelines here, my bad. But knowledge is a valuable corporate asset. That's a core principle or a guideline to say, hey, we know this is valuable. The business unit needs to be responsible for knowledge because it's in their domain. All knowledge sources have to have the owners, because if you don't have an owner, it's going to go out of date. Full stop. The knowledge needs to support specific use cases. It's the so what. I once had a customer who was a Medicare contractor, administrative contractor, and they had 20 people creating content every week. I held up a piece of content. I said, what's this? Who's it for? Why will they read it? And nobody could answer that question. So this is that's why chatbots have been good, because it specifically says, what are you trying to accomplish? And here's the knowledge for that. We need to understand the process value. Again, standardization is efficiency, differentiation is competitive advantage. Competitive advantage comes from knowledge. Governance has to be aligned with and support the business. Knowledge needs to be trustworthy. Some of that's motherhood and apple pie, but it's still important. Again, lots of different ways we can do prioritization. We actually have a full day workshop on that. And then we have to build the responsibility matrices. And this is one I like. A little public shaming never hurt, right? So when people say things like, well, I wasn't there, or, I didn't know about this, or, well, actually, you were invited and you were supposed to attend and you did not, right? But, you have to be able to make changes in a methodical way. Again, are there programs that you can integrate with? How will AI governance change this? What's the balance and flexibility for your AI governance operating model? How do you align with metrics, monitoring, management, the key performance indicators, the risks and rewards, right? And again, we want to say, evaluate the models, choose the models that fit, make sure you have good representation. We didn't get into different types of operating models, but this is stuff we can help you with. So please let us know. Oh, here's a last bonus piece here. When you start looking at large language models, this is actually fascinating from a partner of ours, Immersion Analytics. And what they do is they reduce the dimensions. Remember, LLMs are multidimensional. They can have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dimensions. But what you do is you use certain techniques to reduce the dimensions. Then since you can't think in more than 3 dimensions, you have to add other attributes to the actual representation, like the size of the globe, of the sphere, the color of the sphere, whether it shimmers or not. And what this is doing is it's identifying hate speech in that LLM. By reducing that dimensionality and then identifying where in that LLM you have a hate speech. Fascinating stuff. I know I'm just giving it as a little eye candy here because I saw this really for the first time yesterday. So I'm going to do a lot of investigation here, but this allows you to do auditability of your language models and allows you to do a visual representation of all of that. Okay, we are at the top of the hour. We have a couple of questions. Let's see. DAP products and platforms recommend further looking into. We could talk to you about that. We can also give you some recommendations. Let's see. Metrics on Gen AI that's showing time to saving for first draft generation and additional time for QC on highly regulated content. No, but actually we may have some of that with our project. We're going to be speaking at Bio IT World on our project with Takeda Pharmaceuticals, but that may or may not apply to that, but we don't have that data right now, but we'll look for that. Oh, here's I'm sorry.
Anything that we left unanswered, we can certainly follow up with individuals with more detailed and thoughtful answers.
Yes,
rather than
sorry, yeah.
in 10 seconds.
I know. Thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you, Thomas. This has been phenomenal. Please connect with us. Please reach out. We are right at the top of the hour. So good timing, folks. Thank you so much for your questions and your engagement. And I will look forward to connecting with you guys. I'd love to talk shop. This is an exciting area. There's so much that can be done. There's so much to do. So feel free to give us a shout and just talk shop.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice day.